Before we get started with our episode, we wanted to remind you of a few ways that you can support and connect with the podcast. If you haven't already, don't forget to rate and review this podcast wherever you are listening. You don't even need to leave a review. You can just go in and give us a 5-star review. It really helps us continue the podcast growth and is greatly appreciated. Also, don't forget to connect with us on social media, Instagram and Facebook at Conversations on Dance and Twitter at Convo on Dance. Sign up for our email list to receive an email notification each time we release a new episode. Click the link in the description of this episode to sign up now. Now, let's get into COD. I'm Rebecca King Ferraro.
And I'm Michael Sean Breeden, and you're listening to Conversations on Dance. Today we hear about the Ragamala Dance Company. We are joined by the company's founder and co-artistic director Ranee Ramaswamy and her 2 daughters, co-artistic director Aparna Ramaswamy and choreographic associate Ashwini Ramaswamy. This mother-daughter run company was founded in 1992 and is rooted in the South Indian dance form of Bharatanatyam. Through multi-disciplinary dance works for the stage, engaging the community, and educating the next generation, Ragamala epitomizes intercultural and immigrant narratives that evoke a shared sense of humanity. They train the next generation of dancers through the Ragamala Training Center. We talk with this trio about their origins in dance, the style of Bharatanatyam, the founding of their company, their choreography, and what they have coming up in the next few months. The company will be performing Fires of Varanasi at the Soraya in Los Angeles on April 9th, 2022. The premiere of Ashwini Ramaswamy's Let the Crows Come is April 13th, 2022 at the Baryshnikov Arts Center in New York City. Links to ticket information for both performances are in the description of this episode.
All right. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning. We're so excited to speak with you. We've been watching you guys for a while now from afar, so we're really excited to hear more about the work that you're doing. You know, for us as former ballet dancers, we're so versed in the ballet sphere. And what we love about this podcast is getting to learn about other dance styles and hearing about other dance styles. So we're just so excited to talk with you guys and hear more about your work. So thank you.
So we usually start with a question just about how each guest who comes on first became interested in dance. So we'd love to touch upon that with each of you. Why don't we start with Ranee?
Sure. So I grew up in India and Bharatanatyam, the dance style that we perform here, was the art form that was available in the southeast region of India. So because in India, we have several classical styles, about 5 to 6, which is believed to have come from one main form. But because of the diversity of the country, it became the various styles. So since I grew up in the southeast, Bharatanatyam was the dance form of that region. And, you know, unlike now, there weren't any shopping mall dance schools. You know, very rarely there were master teachers. And then there were a few teachers who were not as qualified, but they served the purpose. So I watched my cousin dancing with a teacher, and I just fell in love with the art form for some reason. I was too young. I was 7. I don't know what interested me, but the movement, the music, the complexity of rhythms and the gestures. So I asked my parents if I could have class. It took a while to find a teacher who would come home and teach. You know, it's a different situation in those days. You couldn't just go off, take a bus and go someplace and learn. So that's how my entry point into dance was that.
So how did you find a teacher? And then what did that training look like if you weren't going to just a school and taking classes?
It's interesting because my parents were very old fashioned. They wouldn't let a young girl go off anywhere by herself. I was 7. My brother, who was 5, was my chaperone. And in his school, there was a teacher who was going to start a little dance class. So when we heard that, that's where they put me. And I was the one person who would learn like 20 steps when everybody was stuck in 2. And then after a year, that school got disbanded, and then they my parents asked her if she would come home and teach because I was so interested. And it was mutual. She thought I was worth it. So in our living room, twice a week, we had a dance class. I'm not proud of that education, but it actually at least gave me that entry point into this art form.
Mm-hmm. Right. About how long were you doing these sort of private lessons?
Until I was 16, I did it. And then like everybody else in those days, dance wasn't for a profession. It was just to learn an art form, because everybody learns classical music, dance, so that it enriches your life. And got married early. And that was the end of it, was what we all thought.
Right. Little did you know.
Yes. Little did I know.
Right. So at what point did you make the move to America? And what was Bharatanatyam? What was the culture with that dance form like when you came here?
We moved here in 1978. I was 26 years old. Mm-hmm. And I had not danced for a long time, but when I came to Minneapolis, the Indian community was about 100 people. And they had, talking to them, sharing with them the information that I had studied dance, and I loved it. So they said, why don't you perform for the Diwali function here? So 99% of people would have not taken that opportunity, but I did. I bought a $25 tape recorder. Someone gave me 2 tapes, cassette tapes of dance music, and I recreated what I remembered. Wow. And danced and found that I still had the love, and those who watched it really liked it. So they wanted me to teach it. That's how I thought, well, I don't know anything enough to teach these kids. Uh-huh. So I went back to India to study. Wow. And that's how it all started. So that at that time, there weren't anyone in Minneapolis Minnesota, who was doing Bharatanatyam.
So then let's bring your daughters in on this and find out how they got involved then. Let's start with you, Aparna, and tell us a little bit about then how you first started, and maybe I'm sure both your stories intertwine a little.
Sure. And my story is a little different at parts from Ranee's and sometimes similar. So obviously, I immigrated with Ranee. I was 3 years old when we moved to the United States. Mm-hmm. And I remember her starting classes in the community here for young Indian girls. Mm-hmm. And I attended these classes, and I absolutely loved dance. I mean, the passion that Ranee felt when she was young, even though I was living here in the United States, I had this inexplicable connection. Mm-hmm. And I absolutely loved it. So I attended every class. I knew all of the material. And the way that my mom tells it, and my grandmother, is because I wasn't a paying student, my mother never paid attention to me. And so my grandmother told her one day that she should look at me because I actually know everything that all these kids are doing, and I'm actually doing a fairly good job. And so, she started to notice. And even at that time, we kind of became a team. So when we would perform in the Indian community, we would perform together. And so there would be mother and daughter in costume dancing together. And we have all sorts of incriminating videos and photographs of these times. And when I was young, so 8 or 9 years old, our current teacher, who is the great Alurmail Valli, who lives in Madras, India, she was invited to the University of Minnesota to do a 2-week residency. So, and she had come here before also, but during this 2-week time, she was doing performances, lecture demonstrations, master classes. Wow. And Ranee joined the master class, and she decided to take me along. And I was the only child in this class. And what my teacher found is that I was absorbing material very quickly. Mm-hmm. And she seemed to be very impressed with the way I was absorbing material and my focus and dedication. I mean, I don't think I ever considered myself a young child. I considered myself extremely lucky to be there and just totally passionate about what was happening.
Wow.
And when we saw our teacher perform, we had seen her in India from, as Ranee describes it, something like, 40 rows back. And then in Minneapolis in the first row, she changed our lives. It's watching poetry come alive, truth come alive. I mean, it's just incredible. When you see somebody like that, like a star, it's like watching the sun. And so at that moment, what happened during that workshop is her mother told my mother that if she brought me to India, that our teacher, Alarmel Bali, would teach me. And that is such a defining moment in our lives. And at that time, Ranee, you want to jump in? Yeah.
Said, can you also teach me? Please, can I also start with you? And she said, why do you want to? You've already been dancing and teaching. If you come to me, you have to start from the beginning. And she is 4 years younger than me.
Oh, wow.
And I said, I will, everything I know now, I know is worthless. I will start from the beginning. And
so cool.
I joined Aparna's class.
That's amazing.
So at 32 and 9, we became partners. We traveled, I think within 9 months, we were back in India, and we spent 4 months in India every single year after that to study with her. We studied intensively, 8 hours a day with her. And during that time, she said to us that she was thinking of presenting her first student in performance in India. And if I was up to the task, she would present me as her first student. And that really, it carries a lot of meaning, because I was a person from the United States. And here was this incredible dancer choreographer who was willing to put in the work and the effort to present me as her first student. And she would always say, don't dance like you're an American, dance like you're from here.
Uh-huh.
And so from an early age, for me, her mother and my mother, we were aligned in saying, if we are going to pursue this path, I was going to become a professional.
Right. So Aparna, were trips to India something that you regularly did before these lessons? Had you been before?
So
we were born there, but since you'd come to the States, yeah.
Yes. So then we went back. So we moved when I was 3. We went back when I was 5 for Ranee to start taking lessons. Mm-hmm. Then we went back a couple of years later. And then after that, back then, even now, it's not easy to pay for plane tickets to go to India. It's not easy to move your family. My father stayed here. He was working. Mm-hmm. He stayed here for 4 months. My mother would make Indian food and put them in single serving Ziploc bags for 4 months.
Oh, wow. My goodness.
And she would come to the school, she would talk to our teachers and principals, and we would get books, because we would go during the school year, because that would be during the Indian Music and Dance Festival. Mm-hmm. So we would see all of the leading dancers and our teacher perform. And that was an important time, an important experience for us to have. Mm-hmm. So we would have a tutor in the morning, and then we would be in dance class the rest of the day. So that, you can see that my mother has a lot of drive, and she is fearless, and that carried over into these stories and these experiences that we had as young people.
Ashwini, I just want to bring you in and hear where you fit into all of this puzzle and when you started dance as well.
Of course. Thank you for asking. During all of this time, I'm 6 years younger than Aparna. Okay. So all of this is happening when I'm 3.
Okay.
And it's a very young age to absorb all of these relationships, this complexities of dance form, and this, very dedicated, very, they were so involved, and I was 3. And so for me, it just kind of felt like there's this thing that is taking the attention of my mother and sister, and what is happening, kind of thing. But I was born into this music, this going to India. I have very strong memories of traveling to India every year, and my mother had to take, these 2 children with her on the journey. So I also started when I was 6, But I had a couple of interesting things going on at the same time. One was a very, I think, normal childhood desire to not do what my mother and sister were doing.
A little rebellious.
Well, I'm not exactly. Is this something I'm choosing to do, or am I just being forced to do something? So I always kind of had this underlying, is this for me or not? And then there's also the sense of, well, everyone around me, I was born in Minneapolis. Mm-hmm. Everyone around me they don't have any idea what I'm doing. I look different than everybody. I'm eating different food. I'm going to this different country, kind of getting teased by people. And so I don't want to be different. I want to do what other people are doing. So I took ballet unsuccessfully. I took tap. I took gymnastics. I took ice skating. I took piano, flute, everything that all the people around me were doing, because I'm American and I want to be like my American friends. So there was this dichotomy going on where there was this rich, fertile, amazing art going on in my house, and I was absorbing it, but I didn't know if it was what I wanted because I had these conflicting issues.
Sure.
So I always danced. I always was around throughout middle school, high school. I danced in all Ragamala productions through college.
And you studied from Amma.
Through Ranee. I did a year with Ragamala Valley in India when I was 6, and it was too intense for me.
It was 8 hours a day. Sounds like a lot.
Yes. And outside in very hot weather. So I always had my foot in the door, but then in order to really see what I wanted to do with my life after college, I moved to New York City and I worked in publishing as a publicist for 4 years. And I would, we talked every day. My mom and sister and I are very close. And the company was really starting to take off more and more with national engagements. And I realized I really missed performing and being with them. And that if I was going to pursue dance, this was the time. I was in my 20s.
Right.
Yeah.
So I moved back and I was able to take the skills I learned as a publicist in New York to become the communications director at Ragamala. And I started retraining again, really recommitting. I started learning from Ragamala Valley in 2011. So now I'm also her student and continuing to learn from Ranee and Aparna. And everything was ignited for the first time. I feel so at home, so in love, so, this was what I was meant to do, but it was just a circuitous path for me.
Right. And how amazing that you accrued this new skill that is so vital to arts organizations. It's very easy that, of course, the art takes precedence, but then you've got to have like the functional aspects of things too. So you were able to come in with this, this side of things that a lot of arts organizations lack.
Yes. And I also just wanted to make sure to mention that the work that we do now, I feel so strongly that people who are young girls who are Indian don't have that experience that I had, where they feel isolated and that no one else understands what they're doing, and that we create this world for them that they want to be a part of, because without Ranee and Aparna being able to drive through that, I wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
Right.
Since we're kind of on that topic, let's touch on that a little, and then we'll go back and talk about the founding of the company. But let's talk about some of the training that you guys are doing now, since you just brought that up. Tell us a little bit about the programs that you guys have and why this is particularly very important to you and kind of touches home for you. Ranee,
Sure.
How about you? Aparna, that's great. No. I was just going to give somebody the baton.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Aparna.
So so as you know, as Ashwini said, we are touring very actively and very consistently. We have a new program, Fires of Varanasi, Dance of the Eternal Pilgrim, which is a large scale evening length work, which we premiered this last fall at the Kennedy Center. And we've been fortunate to tour it live to many venues. And we hope that it has a long life. And we are, of course, creating new programs as well. And we have a small school that we run, this Ragamala Training Center, which we run for very serious students in dance of all levels, from age 7 to adult. And we also do a lot of work in the community. We work, much of our touring is at universities and colleges. Some of the large theaters are on college campuses, but we do a lot of lecturing in different departments, not just in dance, women's studies, in history, in business administration. There are a lot of areas in which we can find these intersections. And we do a lot of work at senior centers, libraries. We bring in other entry points such as food, for this new piece, which is about life and death and the afterlife. We do a program about memorial foods and a lecture and demonstration. We do talks on and demonstrations on visual art. There are basically, our goal is to provide wide access to audiences. For the over 40 years, we have found that our audiences are not just Indian, and we're very fortunate to have the curiosity of our whole community. And so we are sharing our immigrant experience, our cultural experience, but at the same time, we want to make sure that people find a resonance in their own lives and see the shared humanity that we're bringing through this culturally rooted dance form. And so it's not just about the dance at all. It's about these much deeper experiences in our engagement with each other. And so these are all of the different ways in which we find to do that.
Wow.
Right.
It is, in India, dance never was separate. Dance was born in the temples, and there are sculptures, and there is ritual, and there is music. So it's a multi-dimensional art. There is myth, there is philosophy, there is so much storytelling, culture. So you can't separate. So if you present dance, if you only present dance, you're only sharing one aspect of it. So we give, and if you do this in India, you can do a solo for 2.5 hours. People are happy because the individual holds all of it.
Right.
Whereas in America, you have to separate them and explain what is this one body that is doing everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then we bring in to see the dance itself.
Right.
Sure.
So Ranee, you've already brought up how there wasn't classical Indian dance in Minneapolis when you showed up, and then I'm wondering, before Ragamala was created, what was the larger picture like in the States, both for classical Indian dance at large, and then also for Bharatanatyam? Like, what were things looking like throughout the States?
So it's interesting. When I first came, I was mainly within the Indian community. I had no idea of what was going on in the United States. Mm-hmm. The one thing that I know, everything that I learned about what went on before was from the American dance community. So I learned about how Indian dance was seen by the West in Europe, and how they borrowed those and made up the Orientalism. And all of that was something that I learned from coming here. So it hadn't, so I think there were dancers in New York City, in California, because during my age, many dancers, younger people, got married and came to different cities and they set up their dance schools.
Sure.
But, it was a time when there was only phones. There was no cell phone, no email, no computers. So you were not really in touch with anything that was going on in other places. Mm-hmm. So I knew that the dance people, the American dance people, had a knowledge of a little bit about what the, Orientalism is, but nobody had really. And when I say nobody, I am only talking about Minnesota.
Right.
Hadn't seen Bharatanatyam before.
Sure.
But we do know, as I said, in the bigger cities like California, Chicago, and DC, New York, there were Indian classical dancers who were starting to teach, but really not. I think people stayed within their communities, and they taught their communities. They performed for their communities. So that was the situation for several years. And when we met Alar Melvalli and started to study with her, the art form took on such a different meaning. It was so large. It was equal to any art form that was happening in the United States. So the idea that this can't stay within the community, this has to be out to everybody must see this art form. So that's how Aparna and I started to think bigger.
Right.
And I would say that we were the first people who went in that direction.
Right.
I find that interesting when you're talking about touring, because of course you also earlier mentioned when your teacher came and you saw her perform, what a big moment that was for you. And so I love to hear then how much you guys are touring and then being able to spread this far and wide and share it with so many people, because you know the importance of that and reaching out into other communities. So tell us actually about the founding then of Ragamala and how it came about and became a formal entity.
I'll start with that.
Sure.
And then I will let Aparna take from
perfect.
So in 1992 is when I formed Ragamala formally.
Okay.
And the idea that I think the one was the knowledge we have from Alar Melvalli's teaching, that style. And the other was, I had just done a collaboration with Robert Bly, a Minnesota poet. And it was about Mirabai, a saint poet. And he had written a book, a collection of poetry about her. And I found it extremely, compelling to create dance for that. And Aparna and I performed while he read. And that changed the direction of where we were going, because it was presented by the Minnesota Dance Alliance and downtown Minneapolis. And everybody who were interested in dance and poetry and literature came to see that. It was amazing to see how people reacted to that connection, that collaboration of this American poet reading poetry with Indian music and the dance we were doing. And even then, we had a singer who sang the traditional song in Hindi. So we danced to that, then danced with Robert Bly's interpretation. Wow. So it didn't feel right to not have that Indian music, because without that, it becomes something else.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And that made this whole idea that, we need to make work that is accessible.
Right.
So with that in mind, I formed Ragamala Dance Company and made it a non-profit organization. And then from then on, I think I would love Aparna to talk about it.
So I would love to talk about it in two ways. So artistically, Ranee I was a teenager, right? I was with her. I was by her side. I was dancing with her. I was probably giving her opinions she didn't need. But and then I went to college, and my degree is in political science, but I was dancing at the same time, coming back and forth. But artistically, Ranee was on this journey of experimentation, where she was really, really keyed in on this idea of collaboration and working with different art forms, and showing audiences how these art forms could be in conversation with one another. And so that was very interesting to her. And so she created many productions in this way. And then as I began to become more, after I graduated from college, I actually moved to San Francisco. I worked at a law firm. And then I came back to Minneapolis. And when we started creating work together, and I created work as well. And then as we were creating work together, I was very, very excited about work that was evening length, that was original music, original concept. But what if we, instead of going to other cultures, what if we really mined our own? So if we mined the literary traditions and the musical traditions, the visual art traditions, what if we just kept going deeper to find the current relevance and resonance? And so we started talking a lot about that. And it does sometimes mean that we're going to work with a jazz composer and also an Indian ensemble to create a new score together. But thematically, this is the evolution that we've experienced over the last 30 years.
Right.
Now, if we go back to when Ranee first started creating and before she started Ragamala and she started doing all of this work, one of the things that she did to bring it to the mainstream community is to meet with funders and presenters and to ask questions about how to share the work. How to get the work funded, how do you create a 501c3? What does a board mean? I mean, all of those things, right? Ranee did not go to college here. Neither of us studied arts administration here. How do we make this happen? And so she really went with this very curious self and really started making these relationships and friendships and getting all of this information. And so then when I joined her, I took whatever skills I had in, writing and research and whatever. And I worked in publicity and art gallery for a while and we started working together. And then in 2000, we had our first managing director who actually left our company in a little bit of a very dicey state. And so at that point, we had a couple of dancers on salary. And what we all did, because we had to, was we each took one part of the administrative side. And from that time on, and this is where, Ashwini skills really helped us too. We have run the company with paying dancers full-time year-round, and they have developed their skills in grant writing, development, publicity, reaching out, working with an agent, reaching out to presenters, reaching out to curators, running engagement, running a training center. And so we do it all.
Social
media, email, social media. And so we do it all. And we now have dancers who are totally trained to run an organization from the administrative side when they choose to stop dancing. And they know every part of every project from the first idea on. They can write about it. They can talk about it. They can go out and teach about it. And so this is a huge value for us that grew out of the necessity, but this is how it has worked out very well for us.
So if I may say something,
yes.
Throughout these years, when I was doing my experimental choreography and trying to figure out how to start a company, Aparna, from the age, at 12, she had her first solo in India with her teacher.
Like two hours. Those are 2 hour solos.
Yeah. Every year it's like running a marathon. She has been going to India, performing solos in 2 or 3 venues during the music season. So she was establishing herself as a soloist while I was trying to make a company. So it's, you learn you develop each artist as an individual. And here she was working on this at the same time, connecting with me to form this company. So it made this whole. It's not like, okay, we just joined together with a few dancers and put a company together. It was really built from the ground up.
Right. I think it's so fascinating that it's such a big component of the organization. But I want to get back into a little bit more like each one of your individual artistic voices and inclinations. Like all 3 of you are creating works. But like Ashwini, I'm curious. Like you said, you have a different background. You had this your experience growing up. You felt very more like an American. Obviously, you were born here. And how does that change what the product you put out for the company is like? How do you think you differ?
One thing that I'm so grateful for is that background, all those different influences. Rather than when I was younger thinking that they were kind of a liability, now they're absolutely such a strength. I've been able to, Aparna and I went to the same college. I do everything she does 6 years later. Where she was a political science major, I was an English literature major. So I'm really interested in literary traditions across cultures. But I also have absorbed so much of the nuances and the ways that Aparna and Ranee create. And they had so many years to figure out their methods and what works for them. And so that's kind of what I'm doing now. I'm in this stage where I moved back to Minneapolis and I spent 10 years just working on my dance, like no choreography. Just, I need to be the best dancer I can be technically and emotionally and all that. And then I started getting curious about what I might make if I did a show. It ends up being kind of this journey of the different facets of oneself, because in a single day, I feel like 5 different people, because I go to the grocery store and I'm this American person, and I go to class and I'm Indian, and I go to rehearsal and I'm this, different facet. So my work is meant to bring those shades into the audience, but without any dilution of Bharatanatyam. Like in my work, you will see classical Bharatanatyam in its state with classical Carnatic music as well. But then there'll be different sections that will show the different facets. So for example, the piece that my New York premiere will be in April at the Brishnikov Art Center. It's called Let the Crows Come. And it has, its inspiration comes from a Hindu ritual where when someone passes away, there is a period of mourning. And one of the rituals is to offer rice to the crows. And when the crows come and accept the rice, it is a sign that your ancestor or your person who has passed away is sending the crows a messenger to show you that everything's okay. I have ascended. I've gone to where I'm supposed to go. So it's this idea of ancestry living within us and the past, present, and future colliding at all times. And so the piece it starts with a classical solo, and it's all original music with Carnatic music that I present. And it has an arc with poetry taken from India with different facets of crow imagery. And then I have worked with 2 other dancers, one who is a Gaga dancer and one who is a contemporary modern performer who also is from Trinidad originally. So she has African diasporic influence as well. And we worked to repurpose my solo on their bodies. So there is no other Bharatanatyam. They are not doing Bharatanatyam, but they are taking all the same literary influences, all the same ideas. And I have worked with them very closely, step by step, to reconfigure them. So you'll see what the influences are, but through different bodies. And people have responded very well in that they've started thinking about Bharatanatyam in different ways, because it's pulling out different themes that you might not otherwise see if you've only seen the Bharatanatyam solo. So it's kind of a way to see what it's like to experience the world as a multicultural person, is how I couldn't think of a more perfect way. Like that, just like exactly what you were talking about when you're talking about the different facets of you from your upbringing. Like that's what I feel like we're going to see on stage. That sounds so beautiful.
What kind of changes did you make in terms of, like you're mentioning, you're kind of changing, maybe was there changes in style? Did you change the technique, or were you trying to get them to do these classical moves, but with their own influence? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. It started out with this idea of, well, a lot of these other forms, they don't mind expression as much as Bharatanatyam does. So I wanted to see what it would be like if I told them the poetry and what they should be thinking, and having more of a deeper connection to the material emotionally. Also, we did exercises where with my solo, I would show them the gestural aspect. And then Alana, for example, who's the modern dancer, she's got this she's an incredible dancer. So we said, let's see what would happen if you made your whole body look like the gesture. And then she's also very expressive. So she was able to really tap into that. And then for Gaga, as the conversations I was having with Barrett Algren, the performer, one of the exercises they do, and this was something I was already telling her to do, which is to take the Bharatanatyam solo. I made it for her in slow motion in reverse. And like, what would it look like if you mimicked the reverse of it? And they do that in Gaga. They do reverse and everything with the left side that you're used to doing with your right side, so that you can expand your pathways. And so that's kind of how it started, just taking these kind of surface elements of Bharatanatyam at first, and then mining deeper and deeper until their solos really, to me, reflected the potential of something, of a unique vocabulary that we can invoke through other bodies using Bharatanatyam as a starting point.
And if any of our listeners want to catch that performance at the Baryshnikov Arts Center, tell us again the dates and where people can get tickets.
Yes, that's April 13th, 14th, and 15th, 8 p.m. And I think it's bac.org.
Great. I'll be in town, so you might see my face, that audience.
We can meet you. My mom and sister will be there Wednesday night.
We'll be there on Wednesday night. So
wonderful.
We hope you can make it.
And just a few days prior to that, you'll be at the Soraya. Can you tell us a little bit about that program?
Amma, do you want to talk about that program?
You, please.
So at the Soraya, we'll be presenting The Fires of Varanasi, Dance of the Eternal Pilgrim. And that is a show that Ranee and I created for the company. And it is a large-scale show. It has 11 performers. And it has a large set as well that the dancers engage in. Now, the ideas, the themes behind that show is really to use the Indian pilgrimage city, the Hindu pilgrimage city of Varanasi in northeastern India as a symbol for contemplating Hindu thought and philosophy around birth, death, and rebirth. And so this idea of the cycle of life and what are the rituals that we all encounter both in life, in death, and to send our ancestors off to join with the divine. And there are many myths that are tied in. Now, this idea, the city of Varanasi and these beliefs may have existed for millennia, but they are actually believed and practiced by Hindus today, not just in India, but in the entire diaspora. And in our conversations, what we find is that each and every one of us has a story of death rituals, has a story of cultures that we carry, of birth and death and our beliefs from our families. And so this has become a really it's an intimate portrait of these really larger themes that we all obviously deal with in our lives. Mm-hmm. And so the piece itself is basically has been created as solos within an ensemble. So we have 11 people, but in our choreography, Ranee and I, we believe very deeply that each person's training, but each person's expressiveness, technique, and individuality must emerge in their performance in the ensemble. And so we never have ensemble choreography. We do a lot of layering. And so you can really see that in this group, it's like society as a whole, where you represent so many different personalities and people on their individual journeys towards this spiritual transcendence.
Right. I wanted to hear a little bit about how sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but if you want to speak first, and then we can circle back to this question if you want.
No, I was going to say that this piece was commissioned and it premiered at the Kennedy Center outside on the large water body.
That's their new location, right?
Yes, at the Reach.
Yeah, in the water and on stage built over the water. It was beautiful. Magical. It was magical. So
there was no way of knowing when this all was conceived that COVID would happen. And people really, it's a conversation that has to be had now more than ever. It's very
We also performed it on the 20th anniversary of September 11th.
Wow.
So it was a lot of significant things happening in that moment.
Right.
Sure. Yeah.
I wanted to hear a little bit more about how you choose the dancers that will be, you said it's an 11-person piece. How do you find the dancers, and what sort of qualities are you looking for when you're hiring?
Amma, you want to talk about that?
Yes. All except for the 3 pilgrims and the one dancer who is from a different city. Everyone is trained by us because we have a very unique style because of our teachers, the training we have from our teacher. There isn't anyone anywhere in the world who does that style except for us, because she never did a large dance school. And And usually the Indian students who learn from her finish their education and they go off, become doctors and engineers.
Sure.
We took it and we have like worked on it and made it our own and making our own work so that you can see that style very clearly on us. But so we cannot, it's interesting. Everybody loves their own style.
Sure.
And nobody wants to change their style. So you can't just get a dancer from anywhere and say, okay, I'm going to audition you, you can join us. We don't have that luxury.
Right.
We train our own dancers. So every single one on stage have been trained by us.
Mm-hmm.
And sorry.
So no, you go ahead. I'm just, it's so fascinating.
Yeah. The one dancer who's from out of town, there are some people who are, I think I was one of those people that could quickly pick up another style and try to work on it. We copy people. We are very quick to imitate. Right. It's rare, but we did get one dancer who was able to do that.
Right. Yeah. What I wanted to know was, I guess, kind of like how big of a shift it would be between forms of classical Indian dance. Like in the same way that for me as a ballet dancer, like I could, theoretically do like Graham or something or Cunningham, to people that are highly trained, it might be offensive to them, but I could literally not do tap, that would just not be possible. So like within those forms of dance, like how big of a language barrier is that? Is it a different dialect or is it a completely different language?
I can answer that. It's more of like a different dialect. And so for example, when we're doing technique, so let's say we have a movement, of course, for these are listeners, but I can try to explain. So just very basically, we have some foundational technical positions. So if we extend our arms to the side in our basic position, that's called Arambasthanam, which is beginning posture of arms. I have them out straight to my side, and my elbows are up, same line as my shoulders. Now, this is a very particular, specific stance of our teacher. Now, every school has an Arambasthanam. Some of them might be like this. Some of them might be straight. Some of them might be overbent on the elbow. The way that the angle and the degree is going to be different. Similarly, we have a movement that comes over the head like this and has a quick turn and comes from above the head in front of the body. We have a lot of principles around that, exactly when to turn, how close it is to the body, how it's exactly centered in over your head. Now, there are many schools who may bring it over the shoulder and then turn like this. Now you can see the difference. I'm turning my body from one side to the other side. This arm is now coming over my shoulder rather than over my head. If you see that, you will know in an instant that they are from a different school.
Gotcha.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, for some movements, that might be kind of attractive, might be fine. But others, those hallmarks are very, very important to stay loyal to the school. So if you have a dancer we have dancers in this production who have become our students, who've studied in a different style for 20 years. Then they move here and they see us and they'd like to study with us. And they have to literally, they've been learning another style since they were 5. And now they have to put their arm in a different place. And then you have to flow quickly from one to the other. I mean, as you know, it has to become part of their muscle memory.
Right.
And so you're unlearning and relearning. And that's just the technique. The way that we do expressive or theatrical pieces is very different as well. The approach is different. The way people hold the hands are different. And then the way they emote with their face. What the difference of drama versus subtlety is differently emphasized in different schools.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. I'm thinking it's so similar to ballet. Like Michael and I'm sure we were having the same thoughts. Like in some classical ballet, you hold your hand a little more like this. And then in Balanchine, you hold your hand a little more shaped. Like it's just such a subtle thing, but because you do it throughout choreography, it's hard to unlearn because it's maybe like the hand shape is secondary to what your legs are doing or like, to the other parts of the choreography. So it makes perfect sense to us in that way. Yeah.
I think originally there were different to begin with, years, 100, 200 years ago, there were specific people who started teaching this. And it's their name, from the village name where they came from, came these styles. But what has happened is 4 has become 8, 8 has become 200, 200 has become 2,000, sure. 2,000 has become 20,000 styles. But that is not, you can't take it seriously.
Mm-hmm. Right.
There are masters who set the style. And each of us, as you know, because it's evolved, so you can pick and choose the great ones who have made these beautiful the technical changes. Our teacher has worked her whole life to make it so aesthetically gorgeous. You know, we keep talking about our teacher. So Alarmail Valli Barishnikov Pavaroti was selected as the world's best soloist in the Israel Festival. I mean, that's been like 10, 12 years ago.
More, but yeah.
But that's the kind of artist we are talking about, not someone from
an artist that changes the whole industry, you know,
right.
So a singular
emotional. In our style, as Aparna said, there is so much emotional involvement, and the expressions are not to just say, I am going to the market. It is deeper. There is so much internal dialogues you create to elaborate things and to make it natural for people to understand. When our teacher dances, you don't need a language. You don't need to know what she's doing. It's there. It'll touch your soul.
Sure.
That style to learn is not easy.
Oh my gosh, this just brings up so many questions. Like 5 just came to mind while you were saying that. But I wonder, while you're talking about, you've touched on it quite a bit, the emotional aspect, telling of stories. So in ballet, we tell stories and sometimes we don't tell stories. And it's kind of something that's neoclassical, that's open to interpretation. You can take as you will. How much of that comes into your style? Or is it always like a very set, specific storyline?
No, we have both. We have similar to ballet, rhythmic dances, and we have in more expressive dances. For expressive dances, you choose any poetry from any genre, any storytelling, heavy with longing and pain or joy or love, and all of these emotions. So a good dancer will be able to choose the material, and then it's very interesting. I have to tell you, when we were working with a deaf artist, she was interpreting each line into many ways that she could express through her gestures. For us, one line, for example, I, Sada, at all times, if you just take those 4 words, our teacher's choreography takes it for 5 minutes. At this time when you build our nature, you talk about the longing that you have for the person who's probably a god, that you long to be with him. And why aren't, it's like a whole soulful communication that comes. And not many schools do that with such intensity and truth. Like Valli says, I am truthful. When we ask her, how do you do this? We dance and then we videotape ourselves and we look terrible. And she would say, well, no, I'm just true. So you have to arrive at a place when you truthfully. So she would say, watch Judi Dench. Look at this movie where this young man washed ashore, and she's 70, and he's this young man. She falls in love with him. She just look at the way she looks at him. So, it's not just Indian. It's universal.
Yeah.
Bring it into your body.
Yeah. Well, this has just been such a beautiful interview between the 3 of you. It was so enlightening, and I can't wait to see some of the performances. But just to round this out, I wanted to know, just from each one of you, what you personally are hoping that the audience takes away from a performance. What do you want them to leave the theater thinking about or feeling? Ranee, you want to start?
Aparna, why don't you start?
Ranee always says that if she doesn't want to answer a question, that's her. She says, that's my answer. I'm going to say, Aparna, you go. I'm just kidding.
I don't want to answer it. I just want
know.
you to.
No, I just, I think that all artistic traditions, but I think the form that we are presenting has so much richness and depth of music and dance and movement and truth and humanity. The dance form itself was created as a way to communicate with the sacred. That was its entire purpose, with the dancer being the medium through which the community communicated with the sacred. And if you think about that direct communication, it doesn't have to be religious or spiritual, but that is what art does for us. Mm-hmm. And so what I would like audiences to take away is this need to understand every small nuance and open themselves up and allow them to feel and become vulnerable and be moved in that moment.
Yeah.
I love that.
How about you, Ashwini?
You were talking in ballet about how you have these, I'm just pinging off of what Aparna just said, but you have these moments where the interpretation is left up to the audience. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure if as an audience member, you get people saying, but I want to know what every single leg lift means,
Always.
So we just, we're just thinking in the same way. But also, when we have a performance, every once in a while, someone will come up and say, this reminded me of a childhood moment in Iowa or something, and that's all you can ask for, is to connect with someone on a human level and leave an imprint on them. And that's what I hope happens.
Yeah.
And now I will say mine.
Yes,
I think it's both, what Aparna said and what Ashwini said. After our performance in Minneapolis of Fires of Varanasi, there was a person who said, there were 3 people who had lost their family members recently. And one was from a woman from Rochester, Minnesota, not Indian, and another from the Twin Cities. They all felt there is one scene where white powder is dropped from to suggest ashes being poured, and there were 3 or 4 people who said, I thought my mother's ashes were taken to this village, or it reminded me of my father. So, and they were all from various backgrounds. So the universality of art, where all art has emotion, rhythm, beauty, and to just not come into a show saying, oh, this is Indian. I won't understand this, but to just let it flow over you and take what you can. You can't get anything out of seeing one show, but it might inspire you to see other shows.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
What a beautiful.
I have to be a publicist here and say,
please.
The show at the Soraya is on April 9th and in Los Angeles. So hopefully the West Coast can also experience.
Right.
Of course.
Right.
So if you're in the Los Angeles area, go check them out at the Soraya. And if you're in New York, Baryshnikov Arts Center, April 13th through the 15th. This was so wonderful. Thank you guys so much. And we hope that all of our listeners that are in those areas will come out to see you.
Yes.
Thank you so much. And look out for more tour dates as they are announced.
They're really lovely to talk to you.
We sure will.
Great.